probably seen analog modeled EQs, and maybe you've shied away from using them because, let's face it, they're not as easy as something like Infinity EQ. But as we just learned in the previous video, these EQs can be incredibly valuable and provide amazing results. So they're important to know how to use. In this video, I'm going to give you some pro tips for using analog modeled EQs that will let you walk up to any analog modeled EQ and know exactly how to use it. We're going to be looking at the FGS. Now, when we look at this EQ, the first thing we need to do is understand how it's organized. But we not only need to understand how it's organized, we need to visualize the graph and where the bands are. So up top, we have the high band. Then we have the high mid band, we have the low mid band, and we have the low band. And all the way at the bottom, we have a high pass filter. In fact, most all of the analog modeled EQs follow this formula. High bands at the top, moving down the frequency spectrum to the low bands at the bottom. So as I'm looking at this EQ, I'm picturing what the graph looks like in my head. This is an important step to being able to easily use these types of EQs. So when I start tweaking this EQ, I'm picturing the curves. I've got my high mid frequency band set to 3 kilohertz. I'm picturing what that looks like on the graph, and I'm picturing what a 7 or 8 dB boost would look like there. Or maybe the high shelf that I'm boosting. Maybe I turn the high shelf into a bell. I'm picturing all of these moves as I make them on the EQ. It may take some practice to be able to instinctually see the curves in your head when you're looking at an analog modeled EQ, but practice visualizing them and eventually it'll be second nature. So once you've started visualizing the curves, it becomes much easier to use an analog modeled EQ. But we also have some other tricks to make it even easier to use. The next step is to use your ears to choose which band you want to focus on first. It's a really critical step to be able to understand which band you want to focus on with your ears when using an analog modeled EQ. This is where your ear training is going to come in super handy. If you've been progressing along with the Crash Course to Ear Training, you've been practicing identifying the 4 main frequency bands, which are low frequencies, low mid frequencies, high mid frequencies, and high frequencies. You can now use this skill to pick out the frequency range that you want to adjust in your signal when you're using an analog modeled EQ. So let's try this out on a track. We have a vocal that is a bit muddy and a bit honky. Take a listen to it.
I don't know if you're the one or just someone, but gotta know one thing.
And we know that those frequency ranges are somewhere in the mid frequencies and likely somewhere on the low mid frequency side of the spectrum. So I'm going to focus on the low mid frequency band of this EQ. But how do we figure out exactly what frequency to cut, especially since we don't have a visualizer? Here's a trick called Boost, Sweep, Cut that will help immensely with this process. The first step is to boost the gain of the band that the problem area is in. We've identified with our ears that it's in the low mid frequencies, so we're going to boost that. Then we're going to take the frequency band and we're just going to sweep around until we hear the frequency that we want to cut. And we'll know when we've found the frequency because it's going to be an exaggerated version of the problem that we're trying to reduce.
I don't know if you're the one or just someone, but gotta know one thing. I don't know if you're the one or just someone, but gotta know one thing.
So I'm hearing that harsh frequency somewhere in the 300 to 400 range. So I'll dial in the frequency and I'll cut the band.
I don't know if you're the one or just someone, but gotta know one thing. I don't know if you're the one or just someone, but gotta know one thing.
A much better sounding vocal because we were able to identify that frequency and take it out. So we use this technique of boost, sweep, cut in order to more easily identify what frequency we want to cut. Since we don't have a visual aid, we have to rely more on our ears. Try this out when you're using an analog model EQ, and you'll find it so much easier to use.